So good evening and welcome. My name is Henry Garrido. I'm the Vice Chair of the um, Justice Commission, and we here today in the Bronx. I want to welcome all of you to come for our public input session. I just want to make an announcement before we start that if you have not signed up to testify, very able, helpful staff who are raising their hands right now, identifying themselves. So if you want to testify today, please make sure that you sign up. I want to thank you all, and particularly thank the Bronx Museum for the support and for helping the many arrangements that were made and bringing us here today. I also want to thank the staff and for the great work that they do. And at this point, I also like to thank the fellow commissioners who have joined us today, starting with my left, Commissioner Kay Bain, and to my right, Commissioner Ana Bermudez, Commissioner Kristen Cui, and we have not joined yet, but we expect other commissioners to join us shortly, and we would like to start. But in the interest of time and the interest that we want to cover, we'd like to start today. So my name is Henry Garrido. As I said, I am the Executive Director of District Council 37, the largest municipal union here in New York City. My pronouns are he or she, and I also have been appointed to serve on the Racial Justice Commission as Vice Chair. We are led by our chair, Jennifer Jones-Austin, who is not here with us tonight, but has been ever present in all our meetings and discussions. So we want to thank her today. I also want to take a moment to introduce why we're here today. But before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the history of the land in which on today, the land of Native people, indigenous to this country and traditional home of the Munsee, Lenape, Wanapum people. I also want to acknowledge the amazing history of the space that we are in today. The Bronx Museum, and I am a member, community member of the Bronx, a proud resident of the Bronx. This museum, the Bronx Museum for the Arts, has played an important role in the Bronx as the sole contemporary art museum in our borough for the last 2 decades. It was established in 1971 in the Bronx Courthouse and then moved to where we are today on the Grand Concourse in 1982. The Bronx Museum of the Arts was committed to collecting works by artists of African, Asian, and Latin American ancestry to reflect the borough's dynamic communities. Even at a time when racist and anti-immigrant development policies, including redlining, set our borough ablaze, this museum stood fast in its commitment to using art to reflect the beauty and the dynamism of the people of the Bronx. Today, the Museum of the Arts continues its legacy of engaging culturally diverse artists, developing inclusive programming, and providing underserved residents access to the arts. Please take the time to visit this amazing assets to our borough and our city. The exhibits on display right now align very well with the intention of today. And for that, we are grateful to be in this space. Thank you all for attending today's sessions to tell us what you believe are the most critical issues we, the Commission, should address through changes to the New York City Charter that we have here that would have the greatest impact on the lives of New Yorkers impacted by racism in the borough of the Bronx and across New York City. And before we begin again, if anyone needs interpretation, please go to the part of services. Somebody point me where that is. There you go. Interpretation services in the back. Si necesitan cualquier ayuda de interpretación, pueden ir a la mesa que está en la parte de atrás. Si quieren firmar como contribuyentes o para testificar en esta noche, pueden hacerlo en la mesa que se encuentra en la parte de atrás en el día de hoy. With that, I want to start by defining just briefly what this commission is all about. So what is the Racial Justice Commission? The Racial Justice Commission is tasked with proposing changes to the city charter that will uproot structural racism. We will lay the groundwork for a racial equitable city, where race is not a determinant of economic, political, social, or psychological outcomes. New York City voters will be able to vote on the commission's proposal as ballot measures in November of 2022 election. The commission is composed of 11 members, and we are intentionally bringing together smaller groups of commissioners to host each public input session. You see many or 4 of the commissioners here. You'll see more later today. So what is the charter? The charter, as I pointed out, which is contained in this book, is the Constitution of New York City, the foundation for which our government is formed. The charter determines the roles and responsibilities of city agencies, the mayor, and the local elected officials. Are there any local elected officials here today? I'm sure they're on the way. So also to be clear, what can the commission change? The commission is empowered to propose changes to the city charter, which must be approved by the New York City voters. Through a charter revision, the commission can propose direct changes that will affect you, your families, neighborhoods, and your community, such as how city government spends money and makes decisions. It can also change government in all aspects of life, including health, education, housing, economic opportunities, and policing. It can create or change agencies or the power of city officials. I'm going to now turn it over to our Commissioner, Kurt Bain, who will be doing the statement of purpose of why we're here today.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Our statement of purpose. The Commission values your expertise as an engaged resident of New York City. Every voice here matters. You have firsthand experience on the ways in which government impacts your day-to-day life, from sanitation, garbage pickup, to housing, security, affordability, zoning, parks, small businesses on your corridors, public safety, and so much more. Today, we're here to listen. Resources and services and have opportunities to live a thriving, healthy, and safe life in your respective communities. We need your help in identifying the barriers to achieving racial justice. We need you to bring to the Commission's attention ways the government acts unfairly that we may not know about. Your collective input will help us identify patterns that point to larger structural issues within the city of New York. Your input helps us know what issues are most important and most pressing to everyday New Yorkers. Every testimony will be kept in the city record, and the highlighted issues will shape the Commission's agenda to create on ballot measures. Your input will be quite literally shaping recommendations for ballot measures in November 2022 election. Today, we will host this a little differently than most public hearings. We want to take the necessary steps to restore balance of power to the community. So we have incorporated restorative justice techniques into this session. For example, instead of us sitting at a podium, we are in somewhat of a semicircle where we can be eye to eye and have a common respect. Many in this room have been fighting for racial justice while enduring the very inequities you are fighting against. We will start this session first with an acknowledgement of the harm racism has caused Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. We will then review some group agreements to set the foundation of our session tonight, at which point we will start community testimony. If you have not already and are interested in testifying publicly today, please sign up at the table. Each person will have 3 minutes to testify. That's 3 minutes. There will be a stop clock to help guide you so you can stay on time. Commissioners may also ask follow-up questions of those testifying. You will not be timed, but please keep your responses brief. We will start by calling up the first 4 people to testify. Those 4 people will stand in the line behind the microphone, which is in front of me. If you are unable to stand, please inform our support staff who will find a seat for you. After all 4 people testify, we may have questions for some of you, so please stay near the microphone. After Q&A, we will call the next 4 people to testify, at which point the next 4 make their way to the microphone. This may take a couple of times to get, but our awesome support staff will guide us through this process, so please be patient with us. Please note tonight we have mental health support staff that are trained to provide emotional support when necessary. If you're having a difficult time emotionally with anything said in this meeting, please feel free to speak with our arrest responders.
We're also here today to acknowledge what many of us already know, that racial inequalities are baked into the very foundations of this city. Deep-seated structural inequities continue to be reflected in almost every aspect of life, including health, education, public safety, and how our communities are resourced. Many of you in this room have borne the brunt of this reality for far too long. Through the Racial Justice Commission, we have an opportunity to start to address and rectify the harms of the past through structural changes to city government and how it functions to adequately and equitably serve all New Yorkers, no matter their race or zip code. So since there's too many of us to do this collectively, we have worked to create group agreements posted in this room. Back here, our group agreements. So these are, I'm going to read them all. Respect for ourselves, for showing up and participating and doing the work of seeking racial justice. Respect for the space that we occupy. Respect for the health and safety of ourselves and the community, meaning we will agree to wear masks and socially distance ourselves. Respect for each other's right to speak, one mic. We will turn off our cell phones' volume. We will not cheer, boo, or speak while somebody is testifying. Respect for each other's time. We will respect 3-minute time limit. We have a little clock over there. And very importantly, love, honesty, and transparency. Is there something that we have not mentioned today that you cannot agree? Is there something that we have mentioned today that you cannot agree to in this room? Are you raising your finger for that? No. Okay. Thank you. And so if we can agree to these points today, we will have a very successful discussion. And now we will begin our community testimony. Is there the list of folks?
So for the folks who have signed up, we have 4 chairs up
Yeah.
here in the front. They're identified out here. We have a first panel that will be introduced by
Okay.
Commissioner. So as we call your names, you come up to those chairs, please.
So the first speaker will be Laura. I'm going to try to pronounce her last name, Limuli. No? Okay. Reverend Michael Strong. Adil Ahmed, and Reverend Dominique Atchison.
So you have 3 minutes. You go up to
Yeah.
the microphone and then we
So-
may have some questions. I'm
Also,
sorry.
but also as a reminder that this is being live streamed to the public. So if people also in the audience would rather submit some written testimony, please see our staff in the back and they will take your testimony. And so we can start with Reverend Strong.
Good afternoon. It's
Afternoon.
good to be here and to address this committee. But what I wanted to say about racial discrimination is that, you know, it starts with us. It starts with us. It starts in our own community. It starts from our houses. It starts from where we are. The system is structured that way, but it'll never change if we don't. We have it in our own houses, in our own homes. You know, if we don't care for a race, the structure is just going to keep it that way. It'll never change. It'll never change if we don't change ourselves first. I'm strongly believing that. The system has been developed by people, and it's only going to be changed by people. And it starts with us as individuals, wherever our community is. But it starts with us.
Thank you very much for your
Thank you.
testimony and for your words. And you can stay in the front if you like, because the
We might have questions for
commissioners
you.
may be asking questions. So, Mr. Ahmed?
Good evening, members of the commission. My name is Adil Ahmed. I am a community organizer for the Black Institute, an action think tank that does research and advocacy for issues through the lens of Black people and people of color. All of us are here today because racial equity is important in revising the New York City Charter. But I am here today advocating for that specifically in regards to elections. There are over 1.3 million lawful permanent residents within New York City, according to US Census Bureau's 2019 estimates, of which the far majority are people of color. To have lawful permanent residents to be able to vote within New York City, you would have more people of color being able to vote and be represented democratically. And by having more people of color being able to vote within New York City and being represented democratically, you would ultimately have racial equity. This is also not a radical idea. 12 municipalities across the country allows non-citizens to vote in local elections as of June 2021. 9 are in Maryland, 2 are in Vermont, and the other one in San Francisco, California. The fact that New York City, one of the most, if not the most demographically diverse cities in the world, doesn't have this is unbelievable. In 2021 city council elections, there were over 400 candidates. And because of ranked choice voting, there was and will continue to be record turnouts while giving immigrants and people of color the ability to vote. So we need to take the next step. We need to expand our democracy and not just give lip service for people who are immigrants and people who are people of color. We should and must revise the charter to allow lawful permanent residents to be able to vote within New York City. And I should add that while the state constitution guarantees every citizen the right to vote, the exclusions clause in Article 2nd, Section 3 does not bar permanent residents from voting. We believe that New York City can enact and such a right to vote for positions governed by the city charter. It is time that we did the right thing by having permanent residents be rightfully represented electorally as it is in its essence, racial justice. Thank you, and I yield the rest of my time.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Reverend Atchison? Atchison.
Good afternoon, and thank you for allowing me time to speak. I've been a resident of the Melrose section of the Bronx for over 3 decades. Anyone who knows me knows that I represent the Bronx with pride, but I must admit that I get tired of the everyday injustice that comes with living here. Every day we deal with systems that leave us underserved and criminalized. In this area, the only valued people seem to be Yankees fans and the gentrifiers that the New York Times have been reporting are coming for the past 20 years. The reality of living in the South Bronx in particular is the experience of feeling unsafe because there is more of an emphasis on protecting the rest of the city and Yankee fans from us than there is an emphasis on our wellness and our protection. From extra security and police presence everywhere we go, unless we're actually a victim, and then they act like we're bothering them, to major thoroughfares like 161st being shut down, to traffic every time there's a Yankee game, as if we don't live here, to having no 24/7 pharmacies like in other neighborhoods because, quote, people steal in this neighborhood. It can feel more like the original meaning of the word ghetto, a place of containment, a police state. So I have 3 concrete recommendations. One is that I would recommend that a part of the reconciliation process be some form of apology from the city, from elected officials, past and present, to the underserved communities of New York City for the intentional and racially specific policies that have led to these disparities. 2, I would ask that something be written where city workers, especially those who work with underserved communities, actually come from the communities they serve. So that's in all agencies, PD, FD, DHS, ACS, the mayor's office, the mayor's senior staff, the mayor's front office. There should be a quota system beyond the 90-day residency rule in particular. And then lastly, and I don't know how this might work, I would love it if there was something that was dedicated to African-American history in the Bronx in particular. My parents migrated from the Jim Crow South, and Concourse Village and Co-op City and places like that are filled with these sort of stories. And that connection to the Great Migration is a part of Bronx history, not just Harlem history and Bed-Stuy history. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your comments and your testimony. Commissioners? Are there any?
Yeah, I do have a comment, or at least a question to Reverend Atchison, right? So as a representative of the majority of city workers here, one of the things that has been the tenet in New York, in order to give up an even playing field for communities, has been the civil service system as a way of applying for jobs. And most of that came from the Tammany Hall days where people were coming in and buying jobs and leaving communities now. How do you propose that this system, right, which now is based on a ranked choice testing where people take a test, how we can help people in the community have better access to those tests so they can have access to those jobs so that they can score higher? Do you have a specific set of recommendations?
I don't know. Full disclosure, I just left the mayor's office. That's where I worked last. So I'm not just talking about civil servants or the people who take exams or unionized folks. I'm talking about top to bottom. So people who get their position by applying also, not just those that take the test, because the higher you get, the wider it gets and the more likely someone is coming from Boston or somewhere that they don't understand New York communities. In terms of civil service exams, I think oftentimes both of my parents were civil servants. It's word of mouth. It's within family systems that this information gets out. And I think that if there is an intentional quota system, that some form of outreach within the community where people who already work in the system reach out to their community, that might be helpful.
Thank you. And to Brother Ahmed, if I may, Mr. Ahmed, I'm sorry. You are proposing what has been known as municipal voting rights, a system that allows non-citizens to vote. Is that correct? Yeah, excuse me. So in your testimony, you talked about how this would be a way of improving the equitable agenda for voters, particularly for immigrants and people of color. How do you propose, so this is a two-part question. The first part is, if this is recommendations for these commissions are gonna be in the November ballot election, what would be the effective date of that?
Could you repeat the last part, please?
What would be the effective day if, let's say, we put this as one of the recommendations that go in front of the voters? Because what we do here, commissions, as we recommend, it's going to go to the voters and they have the ultimate decision. If that, it will happen in November of 2022, in other words, next year, what would be the effective day of that? Do you suggest, for instance, that it will take a period in which there would be like a transition, like let's say 2 years from that or a year from that, where voter rolls would be ramped up? Or is it your suggestion that this would be immediately upon voting by the voters?
I think the sooner the better. I think something like this needs to be done yesterday. People who are lawful permanent residents make a large portion of the constituents within New York City. They've been paying taxes for a while, but they have not been represented for a while. So I think whatever the transition process would be in terms of this needs to be done up to the best judgment of the commission. But I think at the very least, this needs to be brought up for discussion and something needs to be done in regards to this.
Thank you.
So question, so you mentioned a couple of the geographies in which this is happening and happening successfully. Could you explore with us a little bit with regard to where you see this happening successfully? And you also gave us some numbers. You said 1.3 million.
Yeah, so according to 2019 US Census estimates, 1.3 million people within New York City are lawful permanent residents.
Okay. And talk to us a little bit about where this has happened successfully and what that has looked like.
Sure, so there are several municipalities across the country within states like Maryland, Vermont, San Francisco, California, et cetera. And these are very successful models because, you know, boost of voter turnout, boost in terms of being better represented, both racially in terms of the elected officials of regions, as well as greater voter turnouts as well.
What would you say are the major challenges or concerns in adopting this and making this adjustment in New York City? Where do you see the greatest challenge?
I mean, in terms of challenge, you know, something like this, even with the resolution that's within the city council right now, it's just really getting it to push. I think people have this big misconception that, oh, something like this would be illegal, only citizens can vote. When really, you know, the law is that only citizens can vote in federal elections. There's no specific restrictions in terms of local. And when you specifically focus on this, right, it is the local issues and the state issues that in particular affect these permanent residents. They're taxpayers just like all of us. And most of them are people of color. And I think that, you know, people of color, even if they are green card holders, if they're not being able to vote democratically, I think that's an exploitation of people.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have a follow-up question. What is your definition of legal residence? Does it include people who have qualified as under your definition?
So basically people that are green card holders, that is the basis of what is within the resolution right now, the legislation right now within the city council. There are also people, you know, that have, permanent visas in which they stay within the country. I think that it's really for the commission to discuss that. But the overall thing is this, right? If there are people that are permanently residing within New York City and they are taxpayers and they're not being able to vote in local election, that needs to be looked at. And I think at the very least, green card holders.
Yeah, I have a question for the lady. In terms of your definition of, because you're advocating for city workers to be city residents, how do you define that? I mean, do they have to live here for a certain amount of time? You know, do they have someone who are actually born here, or what? How would you classify your definition of residents?
Not necessarily born here, but I think it would be inclusive of folks who were born here. But people who have lived here a certain amount of time, people who have raised children here, who have gone to school here. So I guess it would come down technically to a certain amount of time living here. And living in, specifically, if you're serving an underserved community, living in or being from an underserved community for a certain amount of time.
So can I ask as a point of clarification, because I see this as two different points. One is residency requirement already exists within the hiring processes of the city of New York, right? Well, I think your suggestion, as I understood it, was a little more nuanced. You said shouldn't just be overall residency, it should be residents from the community in which they are serving. Is that correct?
Yes. I would say born here, but I think there are people who are born here who aren't born here, who, are native New Yorkers, so to speak. So I think there would be some work to define what that means, but definitely just people who have an interest in the community.
Right, but to be clear, let's say, I don't know what this community, let's say you're in Community Board 1.
Mhm.
Are you suggesting, just like housing, that in some areas you would give up the jobs to service in Community Board 1 to people from Community Board 1,
Right.
not just anyone from New York?
Right, a certain percentage, yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
I have a follow-up, Reverend Strong. So, as you were talking about the changes that need to happen at an individual level, right? For people to change, right? And I appreciate how you said that, systems were created by people. So we need to change people to be able to change the systems. Some might argue that that would take a very long time. And so part of what we're trying to do is, as part of our task, would be to create, in a way, to identify places in which, in the past, the policies people have created don't work for communities of color, and then, turn it around. So as we're trying to change people, perhaps they can't, continue these policies that are affecting our communities so much. Do you have any suggestions for a way to balance the two? The people change versus the system changes that we might have more say in?
Well, it comes really with how we communicate with each other. People just, we are foreign to each other. We even have regions that we stay here, it's gonna stay there. We live like that. And, it doesn't matter. The system is structured, it is like that. But we created that, and because our minds, our heart, many times, I'm not saying all the time, we're, undermined. Some of us think, well, as long as it's not in my neighborhood,
Right.
And it's gonna affect.
Right.
It has a bearing, and to ignore that, I think, is very foolish.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you all three for your time and your contributions to our work.
Thank you. We just want to let the record reflect that we've been joined by one of our commissioners, Commissioner Lori Davis, Daniel Favors, has joined us, so welcome.
So the next set of speakers will be Russell Cheek and Cesar Tabar Acosta.
So good evening.
Good evening.
Mr. You already know me very well. I do a lot of work with DC 37, Local 372. A couple of things was already stated I was just like, wow. You know, I've worked with the Black Institute since its inception. So the statements made by Ahmed, I was one of the people who personally worked on the idea of municipal voting for immigrants. And yet it's still an issue. I agree, no taxation without representation. I'm a firm believer in that. And it's been a conversation that we've been having for quite some time. I had a couple of things that I wanted to state when I came up, and the young lady, she was saying, well, just sit back and listen and something might come to you. I'm a resident here. I live on 165th Street in Anderson. And I really wanted to really reiterate, and this is more commentary than question, but I just wanted to reiterate the underserved that we receive, because I live right down the block from Yankee Stadium. And as it relates to law enforcement and police, like they just don't care. The only time we get any kind of response is when there are games going on and stuff like that. I live right next door to a school which would be considered a red zone. The police, they ride right through. It's like there's no care and concern as it relates to that. I remember Bertha having an issue when they talked about opening up the books with Concon. There was a lot of controversy about certain laws and legislation that should be, added and stuff
Excuse me,
like that.
so just, if you could just put your closer.
Testing,
Oh,
1 2 1 2.
they're much better.
How y'all doing? So the reason why I'm here is because I just wanted to be able to just have some input as a resident of the Bronx to say that, right, as it relates to race and entitlements and services and things of that nature. What I really was coming up here to talk about was the health issue, which we already know as it relates to the pandemic and mandatory and things that are being questionably imposed. Everybody's entitled. If there was a question for me, my question would be, who are the people or persons that need to be spoken to as it relates to people imposing such legislation that will require people to be vaccinated? And I know that that's a big issue because right now what it's turning into is exclusion and segregation, right? And so we know that people of color in these communities, there's going to be a lot of things that we would not be entitled to and or have access to. And so because they're not being vaccinated, whatever their choices are, they're going to be denied services and other amenities and or services. So for me, that says not fair. To me, that is a direct imposition to communities of color. And so whoever the people or persons are who can address it and just put it on the table and say, hey, these people deserve the right to not want to ingest or whatever, because it does become a racial issue, because a lot of these people who are in fear of taking these vaccinations are people of color. And because they will not, because of whatever their phobias or conspiracy theories are or whatever it is, they're going to be denied a lot of stuff. And so, to me, that's just not a good look.
Thank you. We appreciate
Thank
you
you, brother. If you
stepping
could
up.
just
You can
stick-
sit right here because I'm sure
ask
there's
some
going to be
questions.
follow-up questions. Mr. Tobar Acosta.
Hi, y'all good? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna try to make this semi-brief. My name is Cesar. I work in the Bronx. I work in a community center in the Northwest Bronx in Kingsbridge and Sedgwick. And continuing up on talking about health. Look, we all have to acknowledge that the Bronx gets the short end of the stick whenever it comes to anything about health. I really don't care. Gustavo Rivera even lives in the Bronx. We also can acknowledge like the Bronx gets shafted all the time. It comes to health. It comes to people talking about the South Bronx as the poorest congressional districts in the country, and a lot of people are tired of having to hear that every single year about how we are the unhealthiest and the poorest. When we gotta start talking about like why, what factors led to these things, and then a lot of people forget that I was like, yeah, the 70s happened. So realistically, we don't gotta go that far back. It's like how do we start healing from that? What actions do the government have to take to actually get us to a place where we can have our power and our agency back? And I mentioned health specifically because I work in food distribution, I work in food justice, managing several food pantries in the Northwest Bronx, and having to see the same people over and over again just puts a greater emphasis on, look, this pandemic just put a spotlight on all of the other issues that have been happening in the Bronx. Most of the people I see are POC, a lot of times it's women that are going to these distributions, and just continuing, I was like, how do we actually take care of our communities? And yes, we do need, we do need money to do all of these things. Money, unfortunately, makes the world go round, and even though food shouldn't be a commodity, it is one of the most commoditized things. So ultimately, it becomes how do we actually heal from a lot of things that have happened in science? And unfortunately, the answer is, look, the government got to step up and do things that aren't also directly through the nonprofits, because we also have to acknowledge that even though nonprofits can do good, they are also detrimental agents as well. You put a Band-Aid over large cuts, it didn't heal your cuts, you put a Band-Aid, you didn't heal. Healing. When you trust some of these nonprofits, it's like, yes, you gave some disguise of healings, but as someone that works in food distribution, we didn't give anyone agency back. We didn't give people choice. We gave people as healthy of food as they could get, while also acknowledging that, look, the Mott Haven market's also there, and we don't get food from there. Mott Haven sends a lot of food outside the Bronx, doesn't keep a lot of it in. So these are places that we should be looking into. It's like, yeah.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
We good for questions?
Yes, we'll take some questions.
Yes.
Brother, would you mind going back to that microphone, please? Oh, I'm sorry. I jumped the gun. She had you covered. So you spoke about the history and the nature of the oppression that the Bronx specifically has seen. I think it's a New York City-wide issue. I understand the importance and significance, the relevance that the Bronx plays in this conversation as we are here. In 1968, Paulo Freire wrote a book called Pedagogy of the Oppressed, in which he talked about true generosity and false generosity. And so when you spoke about the healing that can't happen with the Band-Aid, we brought a lot of that to my and my co-commissioner's attention. And so I'm wondering, in the spirit of solution, you talked about a need for resources, and I also hear you speaking about going to the core or the root causes of some of these challenges. Would you speak to us in maybe 2 solutions that you think are befitting of this problem that is something I see across New York City?
You want to write me a check? You want to write me a check for that?
I'm sorry?
You want to write me a check for that? Like, honestly, this is a lot more than just, for however much time I have to actually answer these questions, because as we mentioned, these are the root of these problems. These problems started when New York City was taken. That starts the entire root of this problem, is that we are on Lenape land. And unless we can go to that, talk about those roots, about how this is a settle, how we colonize this place, then it's okay, colonization, and then the specific roots. While I give people food for a job. These root issues are hard because, as all of us know, we are tired. So many people are tired of having to, literally a lot of people are tired of having to stand on lines to get resources that they need, because in a lot of other countries, these are just things that you get, are so invested in capitalism and capital that's look, these are your basic human rights and your basic human needs, and we cannot give those to our people. And so yeah, people are standing on the line for hours. I see people go to multiple distributions a day just to get by. It's the real solution is literally giving the people the base needs that they want, that they need. It's look, can we give people food? Yes, it's not difficult. Can we start growing more? Can we grow more food in the Bronx? That one's a little bit more challenging because our land and our soil is very damaged in the Bronx. But those are where our solutions should be. It's like, how do we give people these basic needs? Because then people can focus on other things that they want. Like during this last campaign, I was working on one of them, and I spoke to a lot of people, and a lot of them are like, yeah, how much money do you spend? Like just asking them, like, what percent roughly do you think that you spend on your rent? An absurd amount. I live in that same like in that same area, and I was like, yeah, we spend a lot. How much do you then spend on food? On top of that, how much do you then spend on your electricity, your gas, your Wi-Fi for everyone that's working from home? And the answer is a lot. So you don't have money to actually, like, you are always spending to survive. And I was like, a lot of people in the Bronx was like, we are tired of just surviving. It's like, if we wanted to just survive, and for a lot of people, it's like, I tell my mom this often. Like, you realistically did not move to this country to just survive. You came because you wanted a better life. People that were already in this country, they still want a better life. And that is like, can we get our base needs so that we can actually get these better lives? That is the main solution. It's like, look, how do we tackle rent? How do we make rent cheaper? How do we make food cheaper? And unfortunately, because we live in a system of commodity, it's like, no, all these are commodities versus all of these are necessities and should be given to the people.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you. I have a, I'm sorry. Commissioner, go ahead. No, I had a question for Russell, Mr. Carter. Let me just say that my question was, it was more a clarification of what were you suggesting about the vaccine mandate?
Yes,
Because there's no actual legislation.
right.
All of it has been done. The mandate for vaccine creates an inequity among the people
Abs-
in a community.
Absolutely. And so we start with phobia and fear, right? Because we know that a lot of people have that. And then we have the overall medical concern about exposure versus, being infected, exposure versus infection, right? And so for me, and this is just me talking, anything that's a mandate is something that's forced upon, right? And so people reserve the right to not have to do that, whether it's an executive order or whatever. So my thing is, and I don't know, I'm just saying from your standpoint, who are the people or persons who could say, listen, when you start to mandate and impose that, it creates segregation, it creates exclusion, because now, and so we have businesses, and this is all relative to my understanding too, this vaccination, we have businesses that are going to suffer because people are not going to go in there because they say, listen, I'm not getting vaccinated. I already get. This is coming from the mayor, my understanding. He's saying, well, you gotta be vaccinated in order to go to the restaurant, in order to go to the movies, in order to do this and that. So now it starts on a recreational and social level. And then it might be a mandate that says that certain things that were normal and entitlement, you might not be having access to. So I'm asking, like, who are the people or persons who could be a voice for these low and moderate income communities to say that's not fair? You cannot impose that. And when you do that, you create a level of segregation and exclusion.
Thank you. Any other commissioners?
I'm sorry, I did not catch your name when you first spoke.
Cesar.
Cesar, thank you both so much for your comments. And one of the challenges that I'm finding as a part of this body, my fellow commissioners do such amazing work in so many ways. And as I sit on this side of the table, where normally I would be on that side of the table, one of the challenges that I'm having as we attend these hearings and listen to the voices of the communities is that often the community is asking us questions when our role is to hear what solutions the community is providing, which places the burden on the community to be able to come up. Sorry, my glasses are fogging, my double masks, which places the burden on the community to come up with solutions when oftentimes the community is the least empowered and has the least amount of knowledge about where the actual power and resources lies. One thing that has been sort of a theme throughout all of these, regardless of whether it was Queens, Brooklyn, where I reside, or any of the other spaces we've been, is that Black and brown people don't have enough and white people take up and consume too much. And that seems to be, whether it's housing, whether it's sanitation, whether it's healthcare, that seems to be the overarching theme. And without asking you to solve this problem for us, I would ask if you could give us some advice on where we should be looking for the solutions in a way that doesn't burden the community with coming up with them, while recognizing that when I'm putting my community hat on, I don't want the commission coming up with solutions. So we're sort of at this challenging point where hearing what we're hearing, there seems to be, again, this continuity throughout all, regardless of where you live. And it is a historical issue. We know that it's rooted, you went back to the 70s, you can go back to the 20s and the 30s and see replications of the same thing. So I guess I'm asking from a community advocate's perspective, where should we be looking for the solutions that will allow us to think structurally about how to undo what at the heart of it really is Black and brown people don't get enough and white people take too much?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I'm just gonna reiterate what I said when Kay asked me this question, which is, if y'all ever want to write me a check, I will come up with solutions. Again, unfortunately, it's the truth. It's like money does make a lot of these problems go away. And realistically, that's one of the places we have to start looking. Finding everything, the only way to solve these issues from a roots perspective is to decommodify a lot of these things. And you
So
start,
I just want to say, none of us are paid.
oh, yeah, no,
This is all
no,
so-
no, no,
so-
I
so
didn't,
that-
I didn't mean any of y'all specifically.
No, I just wanted to
Yeah.
clarify because I'm sensing a theme when we have these sorts of engagement and the community is rightfully saying, tell us what the answers are. Like y'all, so I just wanted to clarify, we are not paid for this work. So if I could have a blank check that I could give you, I would happily write it out. And if I did, where would I be making it out to in terms of where I should go to actually find the solutions?
Yeah. So it's that latter half, which is like, if you had a blank check, where would you write it off to? And it becomes all of these separate points of like, one of the biggest places to write these checks off to would be making sure that people have actually affordable housing where your price tag does not start at, hey, you have to make this amount of money first before it becomes affordable. Because me and my friends have looked at apartment. I've worked full time. I've even done I've done AmeriCorps, worked multiple jobs while doing so, looked at some of these things, and then was like, yeah, I won't be able to, I cannot actually afford an apartment here. And then that becomes a problem when it's like, it becomes affordable only after I make a certain amount of money, versus it is affordable regardless of how much money I make, because that automatically excludes a lot of people from actually getting a good apartment that they need. It then leads to some people living essentially with slumlords, with essentially landlords that do not care at all about how your housing is. And I've had people walk into my building and it's like, literally be like, that's a violation, that's a violation, that's a violation, that's a violation. I'm like, we didn't even get inside yet. I'm like, yeah, I know, it's where you live is just that bad. I'm like, I know, but it's what I can afford. And for a lot of people that live there, it's like, yeah, that is what we have. That becomes step one. It's like, look, one red blank. Reds who are couch surfing right now because they don't have homes. It's like, yeah, you still need housing, because even trying to get a job when you're unhoused, it's like, hey, you want money, you have to have some place that you're living that's stable. And we already know the problems within the shelter. We know about the problems in the shelter system and how that, which leads people to leave the shelter system, which then makes it harder for you to even get a job again, because you have to leave the shelter system, you couldn't get your checks. So once we are able to give people the stability that they need at the baseline, then we are able to talk about more. And that actually is one of the structural issues. Like, look, there is inequity in housing. If your apartment is do about it, it's like, well, you want to pay for the repairs for your building? That's like for your apartment, because your landlord's not going to do it. And it's like, nope. And now you have a housing issue and a health issue. And then you still have to now choose between paying your rent, you're buying food, or you're trying to get rid of that black mold. Regardless, your health's still screwed over.
Thank you, brother. But I don't mean to cut you off, but I want to make a point. I think it's very appropriate to what you were saying. So this is a city charter. Has hundreds of pages on it. covers everything from agency services to housing to the role of city officials. Part of our task, as you heard from the commissioner, Daniels, was the fact that we have uh, one of the most difficult tasks is take all these ideas that are coming from all the boroughs and all the individuals and try to synthesize them in a way and put them in a way that voters can not only understand, but vote up and down what those changes are going to be. So I want to make sure that I state for the record that as much as we want to hear from the community, not everything that we can't hear is going to be in the ballot. Some may be policy recommendations, like your point about lack of access to healthcare in this community is something that we've heard from other communities. And we saw on enviable the situation with COVID, where a lot of communities got disproportionately hurt more than others. So I just want to make sure that everybody knows that, you know, if you came and you testified, we thank you for it. That part of our task, the difficult task, and you heard that before, is the fact that we have to take all these great ideas, recommendations, and put them in a way that we can make effectuate changes here. And those who are not, probably refer them for policy recommendations and changes that won't quite make it to the level of amending the charter, but still are valuable in its input, right? And others may be things that are moving targets, like you talked about the vaccine mandate. Might not be an issue by the time we get to, hopefully, November 22, right? Hopefully that won't be an issue then, but we don't know, right?
Can I just make one more statement and then I'm just gonna in regards to what he said, I'm also a director over at Banana Kelly. And as you know, I've done a lot of work with the members of Local 372, because they are, you know, disenfranchised union members in the city. And I work very strongly with Donald Nesbitt and Sean and Jacquez and all these guys. And I've been doing this work for over 17 years. So when I'm listening to what he said, like, it almost brought me to tears, because they say to us, what is affordable? Well, I want to be able to pay my rent and still have dinner, right? And so we have 66 buildings with over 3,000 units of affordable housing. So we like to say, part of the thing that we always find as being a dentistry is the fact that we have to, I have a waiting list of over 4,000 people on my waiting list right here at 863 Prospect Avenue. And so we get people that come in with all these FEPS vouchers and all kind of vouchers, and we can't help them. And so then we looked at the city, and the city has all of these buildings that they're using as shelters, and we're saying, so we're doing conversion to different buildings and turn them into affordable housing. But what he said is just so real that it kind of like it stung, because even in the midst of all of our good efforts, that is the original and primary pandemic, housing. You know what I'm saying? Way before COVID, we had a housing pandemic, and it's still very virulent today. And so when I listen to this young man, I have a rental assistance program that provides services for individuals who have a disability that's documented, where we pay up to 70% of their rent. We can't get enough money to have these grants to help these members of the community citywide to get housing. And so it's frustrating. You know what I'm saying? And now you look at, in the midst of a double pandemic, what do we do? You know what I'm saying? So I'm saying again, so I always start and end with, who are the people or persons who could cut a check and give us some more paper so that we can afford to build or preserve affordable housing, not just here in the Bronx, as he said, because a lot of this stuff is citywide, throughout the city. Because again, I have clients, they can't get a job because they ain't got no place to stay. They're going from pillow to post. They don't know what to do. And then it's a mandate from parole, probation, or whoever the law enforcement that might be enforcing their reacclimation to say, like, you got to get a job. I can't get a job because I can't get a crib. I can't get a crib because I don't got to, you know what I'm saying? So it's a tyrannous cycle that we deal with in this hurtful. So I just, yeah.
I just want to add one other thing to what you said, Mr. Carrillo. Being that this is because of a vote, how are we also going to make sure that people go out to vote?
Exactly.
It was hard to get people to vote it was really hard to get people to vote a couple months ago. How people aren't going to be like, yeah, do I want to go out and vote in November? Again, I just voted. How are we going to actually work to make sure that people vote and actually get more people to vote? Because if a third of the people that are able to vote are the ones voting, well, as we can do the math, a third is less than a supermajority of people. It's not representative of all the people. So how do we also get more voices? Like, we have a lot of voices here, but I know a lot of people don't even know that this is happening today. So if we're gonna be talking about this in the actual election, also look at like what voices are already out, like cut out of it. It's already 2/3 of all the people that aren't gonna vote. So that's another aspect to look at. It's like, look, if this is by vote, it's like, unfortunately, a lot of people do not vote. A lot of people have seen democracy, like our democracy as a failure, even though this is technically not a democracy, but they have seen the failings of politics and are like, why do we want to keep going into politics when it has failed us? In their minds, it has failed us so many times. So that's the other question. Is like, yes, we want more
Thank you.
voices back into it. You
Yeah.
actually got to get the people to actually show up.
Yeah, thank you both. Let me just remind everybody that if you want to submit written testimony, you can do so online. If you felt that something sparked your imagination today and you maybe want to have an opportunity to gather your thoughts and do it afterwards, you can do so. Thank you both. At this time, we're going to ask anyone else who would like to speak today. If you can come to the mic, identify yourself. I want to give an opportunity for anybody who would like to speak today to do so at this point. Even if you didn't sign up, you can do so. Come on, you can go up to the mic and just identify yourself. And after you do, would you please sit and we'll ask questions. So.
So, good evening. My name is Fiorina Sanchez. I'm a life community with a background in urban planning and public policy. And the main thing that I wanted to say today is I just wanted to thank you all, to the commissioners, Vice Commissioner, Vice Chair, for participating in this process. I've been following along online on the live streams over the past few months. And I do believe that there is a very, there's a very real possibility of transformation through the work that you all do by listening to all of us in our communities. And, you know, for me, I live in the Northwest Bronx as well, near Caesar. And, you know, it's been said already, right? There's a reason why the Bronx, right, even this room here tonight, isn't packed to the brim while we should be. Right, we are hard hit. Where I live, it's 98% people of color, lower income, a median income of $21,000 a year, high rates of asthma, high rates of, you know, subject to displacement. 10468 in the city of New York leads in the number of eviction cases filed during the moratorium, the eviction moratorium that we see gutted and also coming to expiration. And so all that to say, I will be submitting written testimony, but I did want to stand up and just thank you for being here, everyone, and to the commissioners. And just to say a few things, three things that I, you know, just were top of mind. Last year's revision commission talked a lot about land use, talked a lot about how we make those decisions in the city of New York. I think that there's room there in the land use processes, whether it's ULURP, whether it's decisions and studies and things like that happen before the formal public review process, where a lot of decisions are baked that end up leading and excluding many people from our communities in land use processes. I think that that's one area to revisit, whether there's anything that was left over there from the previous revision commission. Secondly, you know, just in terms of city council legislative processes, you know, there's a fiscal impact statement that is required every time that a bill passes in the city of New York. Before it becomes law, you must, you know, there must be an analysis and say how much it costs. What about a racial impact assessment as well?
I'm sorry, can you get a little closer to the mic because with the mask is,
Okay. Is that better?
that's
Yeah.
much better, thank you.
So yeah, so there's always a fiscal impact assessment that is required for legislation that passes the city council. What about expanding that to other categories like racial impact assessment and assessment of disparities in that? And then third, I would just say that you know, as someone who worked in the mayor's office as well and was a part of negotiating legislation on the behalf of the administration with the city council, there are a lot of inconsistencies in there that I'm sure that you will visit and revisit through this process. But I would just, you know, I would highlight the relationships between agencies and the duties and responsibilities of each agencies, and see how those sort of reporting structures and duties and responsibilities could result in communities like ours being left behind. And one concrete example that I will give is divisions between the Department of Buildings and Housing Preservation and Development, where the two agencies are different. In this mayoralty, they report to two different deputy mayors. And there just can be, as a result of the way that things are structured, there can be lapses in communication and breakdowns that result in bad experiences for community members. So I just wanted to highlight those three ideas. And again, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for your
Thank you very
testimony.
much.
If you don't mind, if you could sit, we might have some questions. The gentleman in the front, if you can identify yourself.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
My name is Dave Schmauch, and I work with the Freedom Socialist Party, and Freedom Socialist Party is one of the organizations in a coalition of groups and individuals that's been working for 5 to 6 years on a police accountability project, which is at this point the Community Power Act sitting in City Council. It's bill number 2245. Inez Barron of East New York, who, as you know, is coming to the end of her term, is the primary sponsor. And we are hoping that a lot of city council members who are incoming will support this bill. One of the themes from that side of the room today is looking for actual solutions and suggestions as to how to change the charter to address systemic racism. And we all know systemic racism pervades every aspect of society and distorts every human relationship in the society. It's in healthcare, it's in housing. Nowhere is it more dramatic than in policing. And the fact that police are very often not held accountable for acts which, by their very nature, are racist acts. The Community Power Act, bill number 2245, seeks to replace the Civilian Complaint Review Board, which, as you all know, is an appointed board, which has no power to do anything except make suggestions, which the police commissioner can veto if he or she doesn't agree with them. This happens more often than not. The Community Power Act is seeking to replace the CCRB with an elected and empowered board from the communities that are affected by policing. And now the district attorney's responsibility. But the district attorney often has conflicts of interest. So an independent prosecutor, we think, is more appropriate in this situation. That's what I like to say. It is in City Hall now. It is in the City Council. You have the power to put this out to New Yorkers in November of 2022. And I would urge you to take a good look at the legislation. We've been working on it for 5 years. And it's very comprehensive. We don't see any conflicts with state law. Of course, we know that those things would be worked out in court anyway if there were challenges, as things are. So, Community Power Act, thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. If you don't mind, visit down, we'll have some questions. Any other commissioner have questions?
Yeah. Hi, thank you both for your comments. Ma'am, I wanted to ask you about some of the interplay you spoke about between Department of Buildings, HPD, and just as one example, where in agencies which have seemingly overlapping powers aren't in communication with each other. We have heard before that it would perhaps be helpful if one of the recommendations to come out of this commission would be a racial justice, equity justice agency that itself would have budgets for other agencies, what, that is yet to be determined, and this is part of ongoing conversation. But based on something that you said and something an earlier speaker, I believe it was Cesar, said, do you think it would be beneficial for us as commission members to consider enshrining and institutionalizing in an agency level some sort of body that would be able to have not because we're very time barred. We have a lot to accomplish in a very short period of time.
Right.
Would you think it would be advisable for us to consider as one of the solutions to addressing structural racism and the institutionalization of white supremacy, to have an agency that itself would have the ability and would be empowered and charged with monitoring these types of interagency communications, perhaps mandating that racial justice assessment that you noted, which is something that we're starting to hear a lot. We do have environmental impact statements. We have other types of impact statements if we're truly committed to racial justice and equity. Where's the racial justice and equity impact statement? And then a look back that says, okay, we tried this thing. We thought it was going to help undermine some of the structural underpinnings of white supremacy, and we're going to look back now and assess as well. Do you think something like that would be advisable? And if so, what would you like to see that agency empowered to do?
Yes. So thank you. I do think that that function would be invaluable for the city of New York to have. I would posit the question of whether it makes most sense to create a department, right, a city agency, whether it's a mayoral office, whether it's changing the mission and scope of economic opportunity or the mayor's office of operations, offices that have been created over time to improve the efficiency of government and to help agencies speak better to each other, right? But I absolutely think that the more central and empowered that an agency can be to request information from all other city agencies, sister agencies, and to be situated in a place that is close to the seats of power, right? Sometimes if you, be very honest, right? It's going to be buried in XYZ, right? Part of the charter, part of the administrative code. So making sure that something like a department that is going to be empowered for overseeing, racial justice, racial assessments, disparity assessments, that agency should be empowered with or office. I think it's subpoena power, right? With sister agencies, I think it is, part of that is you can write it in, and part of that is going to be based on, the way that that next mayor is going to govern, but making sure that that next mayor or deputy mayor, wherever this office sits, is empowered to have those relationships with the commissioners and deputy commissioners who will report in real time. And I think primarily it's subpoena power, it's issuing recommendations that hopefully are also binding with the other agencies, and making sure that a process is created by which those binding recommendations are refined.
So just to be clear, and so that the record is clear, you are in agreement, and please correct me if I'm wrong, with the idea that such an agency should ideally be independent from changing in political guards. So it would be an agency that would perhaps retain its power regardless of who is mayor, that would be able to demand information from other agencies, make binding recommendations, perhaps with penalties associated for recommendations that are not implemented. Are these of the sort of things that you're thinking of?
Yes, and I would only amend that the binding recommendations, that there be some sort of process to arrive at those.
Very fair. Thank you.
Any other commissioners? Well, I have a question. In your testimony, you talked about the Euler process, and some of us have heard in other hearings how some parts of the community feel that Euler process empower after, the charter revision to eliminate the Board of Estimates and the creation of it gave more power to the communities. Others have testified that it simply doesn't work because it gives too much power to the local electives to make decisions over the community, even when the communities feel very strongly against some issues like rezoning and other place. If you could, I couldn't quite understand, were you suggesting that the Euler process was still a process to go through in this, or would you suggest that there would be a substitution of that process?
Yeah. So I always start off by saying that New York City's ULERP process is one of the best in the nation in terms of how we're able to get projects from start to finish in a timely manner. But then I always say that the bar is very low because the way that our process works is that you have 2, 3, 4, 5, many years of a project being baked and created before it enters the formal review process that is, some 7.5 months, right? 2 months with the community board, 2 months with the borough president, 2 months, et cetera, et cetera. And so what I am, and have been a part of coalitions that have been recommending is how can we take that previous 2, 3, 4, 5 years of planning that is happening with an application before it enters the ULERP process? How can we bring more of that into light for community members to be participant in that, right? Because by the time that the Department of City Planning certifies an application and it enters that review process, it's basically, it's not going to change very much. And so, and it has to do with power and access and, equity, that the many questions that you all are grappling. How can you change the rules and the structures and the process so that, maybe something is due sooner, and when that thing is due sooner, the pre-application statement, when that is due, that becomes the public process. So I'm merely saying, that community is left the elected official is to empowered. In this current, in the last, 5, 10 years, you've seen many models of projects go through, and it kind of depends on the personality of the elected official or elected officials that are the local members, whether there has been extreme community participation, in the sense of, I'm going to take it upon myself to create a process, or things happen, largely behind closed doors. So I actually think that Borough President Brewer, for example, had a really cool process where she had, when developers started to come to approach it, because they go to the officials early before the community, when developers would approach her, that would trigger her review process. And so how do we codify the kind of behavior that those, in my opinion, those good processes that included community, how do you codify that so that, the process itself becomes more inclusive?
Thank you, Ms. Sanchez. And sir, I couldn't quite catch your last name. David Ace. All right. Any other questions from the commission? Thank you both. Thank you for your testimony. Is there anyone else that would like to testify today? You can come up to the microphone. Thank you. Thank you both. Anyone else? Going once, going twice? Sure, go ahead. Well, wait, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to your question about a racial justice department, or something to that effect. The only hesitation that I have, or the only thing that I would say, is that there would need to be like real clarity around the role. Just, having worked for the city, when the Office to Prevent Hate Crime was introduced, then CCHR was like, this is my territory.
Yeah.
Sometimes Moya was like, this is my territory, the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs. So I think that there are already established groups who believe that part of their mission is to kind of dismantle racism. So I would just sort of recommend that there is some real clarity about where it stands and what the boundaries are. But other than that, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Wait, before we get to this, because we want to make sure anybody who hasn't testified has a way to do. Is there anyone else? If not, then Mr. Ahmed.
Hold on.
Not that lady.
I think we're waiting
I don't know
to
if
see if
she's
she wants to.
going to- Miss, are you waiting to testify today?
Want to say
Would you
something?
like to testify today?
Welcome. Hi.
I'm gonna adjust the microphone.
I'm going to testify anonymously, although some of you may know who I am. My name is not going to be
Get very
said.
close to the mic so that, yeah.
I'm not going to say what my name is, but I have strong feelings about being here because I served as the city's chief EO officer for 10 years. This is what I do, racial justice. I've done it for the city for a long time, and I currently serve and I'm the chair of the Special Committee on Racial Equity for Community Board 8. One of the problems that I see in my experience, many years of experience in government, is that we have the charter. I used to read that charter every day, particularly the parts that pertain to what I did. What we don't have is enforcement, and we don't have consistency. So when we talk about, for example, having an agency to address whatever, we have the City Commission on Human Rights. It's in place. We don't need to make a new agency. What we need to do is enforce the things that we say we believe in. When we say we want to change people, we need to get involved in the community boards. But by the same token, the community boards need to be strengthened. And little by little, I worked for the city when there was a board of estimate. Okay, I used to go to those community board meetings on behalf of David Dinkins and listen to what people had to say and really try to do something about it. But over the years, from the human rights laws on the federal level to the board of estimate, these things have been rolled back because some forces don't want them. So, you know, I think that if we think about ways to make things stronger, that is what we have to do. And if you're going to talk about the charter, there have to be specific provisions to do that. I heard people talking about hiring, city hiring. I worked for DCAS for 12 years. I don't know how they hire now because I haven't been there in a long time. I'm sure that they probably do online stuff. But the real question is, how do they publicize it? I don't hear a lot about city exams. I don't hear a lot on TV. You know, they could have kiosks or, you know, advertisements where people could see what tests are coming up or what the city is looking for. I don't know if that's happening or not, but I think we have to use technology a lot better to find out how we get information or to give information to people who are interested. And the other thing we don't enforce is residency. You know, I mean, I could go on and on about that, but I'm not. But ways to enforce residency requirements. I also was thinking about how we combine, and I was part of that effort at the mayor's office, when we combine the police forces. One of the things that we probably could think about, I mean, this is really far out, is the uniform forces. Have a test for people who are interested in working for correction, police, fire, anything like that. See who's really qualified, see who's an advocate in the neighborhood. Don't make the points added for people who are in the military, make it added for people who are involved in New York City and their communities. Either as advocates or as people who are just involved as people who match the demographics of particular neighborhoods. I remember one time the police department did something where they took Haitian officers to deal with a Haitian issue. They didn't talk about it a lot, but that's really helpful because people trust who they're dealing with if they look and speak like them. So those are just some of my ideas. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Miss, would you be available for some questions if the commission have any? Now, I want to go back to Mr. Ahmed before you were going to, go ahead. Briefly, because we want to get over to the people who haven't spoken yet.
Hi, so I just had a quick comment just to follow up, you know, when we're having that conversation. So I think I agree that timing is definitely a very key essential component in terms of permanent residence. But I think I really need to emphasize how we have citizens, US citizens, required in the state constitution for them to reside within 30 days, meaning after 30 days, a citizen who moved from another state can vote in New York City elections. And there are people who have been living here for decades. My uncle, for an example, has been living in the United States for decades and is a green card recipient and can't vote. So I think that distinguishment is definitely something that needs to be taken into account. And in the end, green card holders are permanent residents who should be given the right to vote. And it is a racial justice issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, Commissioner? I know we didn't quite catch your name. And we won't, but for.
Community Board Member 8, yes.
Community Board Member 8, I like that. Any questions?
I do have a question. So in reading the charter as well, and based on both of your comments on how we do have certain institutions through the city charter that could be doing this work, and maybe they're either not coordinated, or also it has been argued that they don't have a lot of teeth, if you will, and the enforcement piece that you're talking about. Do you have a particular suggestion as to how we could, through a revision of the charter, make them either more independent or having more of an impact, if you will, than we do now?
I'm not sure what the answer to that question is, because when I was hearing it just now, I thought about the CCRB, independent. I don't know.
Right. No, they suffer from the same issue, even though they're independent.
Right.
You know, the issue of impact
Right.
and authority.
Right. I know when I worked for the state, they had this, I don't remember what the title was, but it had to do with police involved incidents, and they had an independent person.
Yeah, that was.
I don't know.
Right.
You know,
That was
we-
more of a recommendation that never came into effect.
No, I worked with
There
him.
was some
I worked
pieces
with him
of this-
directly because at the
Yeah.
time I was in the law department in Mount Vernon,
Right.
and somebody died up there, and he came. So we did meet with him. It was actually put into play, but again,
Yeah.
you know, I think it really depends on what whether or not we as a whole want what we say we want. And I think that I've seen so many efforts to defeat things that are, to me, would improve the society as a whole, but there are special interests that are not interested in that.
Yeah.
So the enforcement part is really, really tough. You know, some of the best years of my life was as the EEO officer, but there's also some of the worst years of my life because of that piece and the ways that, you know, I always felt some sort of sabotage and fear and concern about what my actions, you know, what outcome would result from my actions or my words or my thoughts. So the independent part is what we need. I just don't know who they report to. It
Right.
can't be
Yeah.
the
Right.
mayor that changes
Right.
every 4 years.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's the governor either.
Yeah.
You know, it's a tough question, and I think that's often what the problem is.
Thank you. Any other commissioners? Thank you for your testimony today.
Yeah, if you wanted to
it's
comment
just-
on that, yes, because I think they both have similar.
Similar to you, I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure how it would be structured. I don't believe it should be something that is under an elected official. Because if anything is found, there's gonna be a tendency to wanna cover it up. So I'm not sure if there is a way to be independent and then therefore independent of any elected official. So I think this might be one of those questions that the community does not have the resources to
Well, no,
answer.
Yeah, it's also, just to be clear, just to clarify, there are state laws and in the state charter that are different from us. We have an attorney general who has some powers within the state constitution that this commission will not be able to change. So I just want to remind it that there are some limitations as it applies to the city, but it doesn't preclude us from making recommendations to other agencies, whether state or citywide, that things that, as I said before, may not rise to the level of being on the ballot, but it's still good economic, good policies, community policies, economic policies, community policing policies, these things that we can do. And we are willing to listen to those.
No,
Okay.
and I wouldn't expect necessarily anyone, to know the answer to this. It's a really difficult one.
Yeah.
That we're gonna have to debate, as much as anything, as well, so, yeah.
Well, we want to thank you today for
Thank
your
you.
testimony. Is there anyone else that would like to testify? Is there anyone else that would like to testify? Going once, going twice? So thank you very much, all of you, for coming. We want to thank you for your participation today. As always, I want to thank my fellow commissioners for their participation and their attendance today. Please, I want to refer for upcoming hearings that we will be having. And I want to refer everyone to follow us on social media at Racial Justice NYC and Instagram and Facebook, and our Racial Justice NY, not C, NY on Twitter. Or you can go to our website, nyc.gov/racial justice. In there, you can find out information about some of the work that has been done already, also future hearings, and your ability, as I said, to submit testimonies for the commission to consider. Thank you, everyone. Thanks. Yes, Michelle?
We'll have our virtual sessions. I don't know why I did that. I'm sorry. We'll have virtual sessions next week. So make sure to sign up so we can send you emails about that.
Right.
Thank you.
And also for those of you who were concerned that not enough people had heard about this or whatever, spread the word so that especially in the virtual one then, or any further ones that we have, we get more folks.
All right, thank you, everybody. This commission is adjourned.
How you doing?